The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch UK Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Paranormal Concept right here on Parasearch UK Radio with your host, Paul Rook.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host tonight, Paul Rook, and we have got a really good show planned for you tonight. First of all, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Kerry Greenaway. Hello, Kerry.
You?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. Have you had a good week?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. I can't complain.
Okay, cool. Is that the only way you want to go?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. We are going to be discussing tonight Wicca and all things Wicca related, sort of. I think that's where we're going to go tonight. I'm going to introduce my first guest tonight is Ashley Mortimer. Hello, Ashley.
Good evening. Hello, Paul.
Hello. How are you?
And Kerry as well, of course.
Hello.
That's it. I mean, I've not got too much insight into Wicca, so I'm hoping to learn quite a lot tonight.
Me either. I haven't either. I thought you were going to teach me.
No, that's why I got Kerry.
Okay, Kerry's good. I'm relieved.
Also invited David Farrent along tonight. Hello, David.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, Paul, thank you.
Good. Have you had a good week?
Not too bad, not too good, but I'm still here.
That's it, and it's always a plus then, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right, so basically tonight we're going to be discussing Wicca, and I for one will confess that I don't know too much about it. So I've surrounded myself tonight with lots of people that know a little bit more than I do. So, Wicca. What is Wicca? We'll go with Ashley first.
What is Wicca? Crikey, where do we start? Well, Wicca's a slightly more modern word that refers to a practice, which I suppose some people would call a religion. I certainly would. That harks back to, supposedly has roots in our ancient pagan belief systems in this northern part of Europe in a pre-Christian era. And I say supposedly because really this term Wicca sprang up in the middle of last century following the discoveries, shall we say, and the writings of one or two people, quite key characters. But Gerald Gardner is the name that people are most familiar with, who began to write shortly after the repeal of the Witchcraft Act in 1952 about the modern day practices of witches, and he described it as a revitalized, renewed, and he, in Gerald's terms, a continuance, which is maybe not quite so easy to prove, of ancient pagan beliefs in and a religious system in that respect, and a system that involved magic as one of its primary methodologies for practicing the religion and following it. So that is pretty much what Wicca is. We don't see the use of the word Wicca until, in any common form or in any context relating to this, until about the middle of last century.
Okay. Because in my research, I did come across the name Gerald Gardner, and that was back in 1954 that she introduced Wicca to the public. Is that right?
That's pretty much true. Yeah, Gerald was born in 1884. He spent a lot of his adult life out in the Far East. He worked on rubber plantations, Malaya, Borneo, and Ceylon, and he was interested in archaeology and anthropology. Returned and retired actually back to Britain late 30s, 1936. He came back to Britain, and he says, he tells us that he discovered a group of people on the edge of the New Forest who were practicing something that intrigued and interested him, because he believed it was an indigenous to Britain pagan religion, which he recognised then as witchcraft. And they used the word the Wicca. Gerald's very careful to spell Wicca with one C most of the time, interestingly. And they described themselves as the Wicca, and he was initiated into their practices, rites and mysteries in 1939. And he went on to write about it thereafter, worked for 10 years or more as a priest of the craft, as a high priest of the craft, actually, and a witch. And it was in 1951-52, just as the Witchcraft Act was repealed, that he really started to get to publishing non-fiction books to talk about the modern-day practices of witches and witchcraft.
Okay.
So there you go. That's a very potted history of Gerald Gardner. There you go.
Okay, cool. I've actually, again, looked at some research. Very rarely do I do that. But it does actually...
I hope it wasn't mine.
No, I just pulled up a website online, and it says in there that thanks to archaeological discoveries, we now have basis to believe that the origins of the belief system can be traced even back to the Paleolithic peoples who worshipped a hunter god and a fertility goddess, and that was going back to around 30,000 years ago.
Well, I can comment on that only in as much as to say that from what we know of our archaeology, that our human ancestors did indeed have views that seem to reflect the idea that the earth essentially was a feminine, divine thing, and it required. It was probably a bit later than that. Probably when you get to about 10,000 BC that you start to see any notion of a male being involved in this. Because, of course, agriculture and that sort of thing doesn't begin until that kind of era. People hadn't twigged that it needs a male and a female of a species in order to be fertile. But, yeah, what we're talking about is our ancestors worshipping the divine principles of fertility, which, of course, is the same principle that modern-day witches, or Wiccans at least, that's what they're doing in the same way, but not in the same way. I don't think anybody would suggest that the practices have managed to survive in any kind of recognisable form. And really, when you're getting as far as 30,000 years back, we're not that good at knowing exactly what our ancestors were doing. We're doing quite a bit of second guessing from things like cave paintings and slightly carved statuettes and the like. But across the world's cultures, most of our modern civilizations, their roots lie in fertility goddess worship, and from there later comes the notion of a male god. So when you get to modern day Wicca and this concept of fertility being revered and celebrated in a personification of male and female divine principles, a horned god and a fertility goddess, then I suppose you're talking about roughly the same thing. But that's pretty much where the similarities any trace of those similarities can end, other than the notions and the concepts. Yeah,
I did also look, and it said like Wicca is known as a religion as opposed to witchcraft, because witchcraft is not.
Well, I mean, David might have a better insight into that than I do, but I mean, there are different views of what Wicca and what witchcraft is, and you know, I've got a party piece that I do, which is the 30 seconds all views of what witchcraft is. But I mean, witchcraft is it's a word that's vague, and it's a word that comes different things to different people. If you went to sort of sub-Saharan Africa and talked about witchcraft, they'd be talking about something totally different to the idea of you know, people in Wicca in the UK or America practicing what they practice in circles and you know, recognizing 8 solar festivals of the year and so on. So it's witchcraft is a sort of broader term, and it has different meanings in different cultures and different places. So it's not so easy to describe, although most Wiccans would describe themselves also as witches.
Okay, so David, what do you think about that? Is there a difference, or?
Well, I agree with what Ashley said, but there's one thing we've got to remember, I think. A lot of the prejudice against his interpretation of witchcraft was put about by the early church and the early witch trials. I mean, some of the things that have been passed down and repeated by people. I don't think that version of witchcraft has anything to do with the true meanings of Wicca. No, I don't. But having said that, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Wicca does go back quite a long way into history. I don't know if it goes back 10,000 years as far as that, but I certainly believe it goes back way before the medieval period. Probably was quite well practiced in what we call the Stone Age.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic principles of it, their belief in a feminine principle, which was represented by Mother Goddess, and the male principle, which was represented by the horned nature god, with the early church took no time in turning into the Christian devil.
Yeah, undoubtedly, David's right that the coming of monotheism, which is probably about, I don't know, the first monotheistic culture must be Egyptian, about 4,000 or something. But there's this sort of sea change in attitude to religion, and particularly in this country that we see. Strangely, it's a bit later. I've always thought of it around about the Norman conquest times. Prior to that, you've got weird cases of Anglo-Saxon kings like Raedwald, who's keeping two altars, by all accounts, one to the old gods of his fathers and one to the new incoming god of his sons. But Christianity, arriving on these shores, doesn't immediately take over and start crusading. The Crusades and things happen kind of culturally and economically around about the time of the Normans, and it's only just then that there's this idea of imposing a belief system on people. And my personal opinion is that that's as likely to be cultural and economically induced as it is to be in any way, spiritually induced. And yeah, that's it. They try to impose that, and that turns into the witch trials and the other things. But David's also right in saying that the early church did indeed start associating nature gods like Pan, who had horned feet and had horns and cloven feet, with this concept of devil or adversary, which is an Old Testament concept as far as I can understand. And it was certainly linked for the purposes of demonizing, which is a great word in this particular case, the pagans and the way that they were like Romans and Greeks, and the idea of polytheism and pantheism and all these other things that were conflicting with Christianity. So yes, he's right. The early church did use any association they could to suppress what they didn't like, which was anything that contradicted their views.
I think there's more proof about that with the attitude of the early church, in the fact that when they came over here, obviously to England, trying to convert the people to the comparatively new religion of Christianity, they went to great lengths to suppress it, or take it over, if you like. And one thing they did do was that people that practiced Wicca used to attend ceremonies, and they understood the power of the land. They held their worship in or near stone circles, for example. And when the early church came to this country, they didn't take long in deciding that all the stone circles were connected with the devil. And they employed people known as crackerjacks to go around and demolish all these stone circles and any buildings that stood near them, and smash them to pieces. They must have destroyed hundreds and hundreds of sites over the country over a period of years. These were not places connected with devil worship. They were connected with a much earlier religion. For example, I'm probably telling you the obvious here, Ashley, but
no, I'm listening. I'm fascinated, David. Yep.
Part of the strategy not so much to convert people, but to take over their sites. Now, a lot of these sites were connected by, let's say, earth energy. That is, energy that runs beneath the earth's surface. Some that were known as sacred sites, and the ancient people, to use that term loosely, understood the significance of these sites, which is why they built their places of worship on them. They regarded them as sacred. One of the first things the church, I'll try to be quick because it's quite a long thing to explain. One of the first things the church did, there were ceremonies throughout the year, and a lot of them were governed by the cycles of the moon, not so much the numerical dates, but by the actual cycles of the moon, which everybody knows and recognises, can affect human beings. Well, it affects animals too, that's more or less been established. It affects human beings, hence you have the word lunatic, and hence the old gossip or supposition about people changing into werewolves at full moon. And one of the principal, we'll get on to Gardner later if you want. As far as my understanding is that at one stage, they were governed by the cycles, phases of the moon. There were 4 major dates in the Wiccan calendar. That is the winter solstice and the summer solstice, and obviously the spring equinox and the autumn equinox. Now, Wiccans have their own way of celebrating this. For example, the winter solstice falls on the 21st of December, and it was celebrated in the old religion, I'm calling it the old religion at the moment, by the use of mistletoe and holly, and the use of small fir trees which they used to plant during the ceremony. The point of that being that all these items were evergreen, which symbolised the sign of the proof of everlasting life. The early church came along and they had to find a date for the birth of Christ. And so they took over the 21st of December and attributed that to the birth of Christ. Hence we have Christmas. Hence we have the Christmas tree. Hence we have the mistletoe. Hence we have the holly, which were all used in the old religion to celebrate something which had a far deeper meaning. Very quickly. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I'm just agreeing with you completely. I'm going to add something afterwards, sure.
Okay, well, very quickly, to go on to Easter, that was symbolised by the symbol of an egg, and it represented fertility, which again ties into the concept of a mother goddess and a male principle. The church, it was originally symbolised in Wicca, that's the true Wicca, by the sign of an egg. Mm-hmm. And the church immediately took this over, hence we have the Easter egg. So there's a lot of meaning behind these things, which is really there, and it's so obvious if people just look at it.
It's hidden in plain sight is what we'd call it, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just pick up on that, then David's quite right. The winter solstice and this idea of a renewing evergreen cycle of birth, death, rebirth that goes on, that's part of the solar year, the bearing of a child of light at that time of year, is one that we find in many other religious cultures, this idea of a returning light. And in fact, as he says, the Christian view of Jesus Christ as a savior, as a messianic savior God embodied on earth, being reborn, or at least surviving death, his resurrection, which occurs at Easter, in a renewal that indeed relates to the idea of eternity embodied in the symbolism of an egg. These are stories and mysteries that are of a greater depth and greater cycle than just one religion's view of things. And indeed, they do echo earlier, as far as we can tell, earlier views of a great mystery cycle of the gods, if you like, of the divine feminine and the divine masculine having their fertility cycles and so on, embodied in the source of all energy in our universe, the sun, and the sun's apparent journey through our sky, although we know now that the earth goes round the sun, and that's somewhat something of an optical illusion. But these festivals that are solar festivals that relate to the moment when the sun is at his highest or at his lowest, and these are stories that echo a deeper mystery and an older understanding of these mysteries. And modern-day religions like Wicca are definitely seeking to help their adherents, their initiates and followers to understand and connect with these great cycles of deeper and bigger stories. But then all religions are trying to do that, and Christianity was no different. Christianity used a very accomplished Roman method of taking over what was already in existence. The Romans did that with everywhere that they conquered. They picked up the local deities that were being worshipped and said, oh, well, that's just the same as our deity this, so we'll just call it that. And that was a mechanism that the Christians from the Roman Empire, when they arrived in Britain, did exactly that. As you say, they looked at the places that were being used for religious worship and said, well, we'll site our churches on those sites as well, because that's where people come to worship religiously. Doesn't matter what the religion is, people will come anyway. We'll do it with ours, Yeah. And that's that. So yeah, we're talking about these great cycles of mystery and people's individual connections to them. And I think that's one of the reasons that modern pagan religions like Wicca have caught a cultural current and caught an appeal in people, because people have been looking to make that connection and have become increasingly disillusioned with some of the more mainstream religions, which I think is just a natural thing. You become used to something for a long time. People eventually suffer a bit of disillusionment with it. And by the time that Wicca was becoming popular and interesting in the late 60s, which is after Gerald Gardner had died, and as Doreen Valiente and other important characters in the story would attest, the 60s was a time for great experimentation in culture and religion and adjustment of consciousness. And Wicca really hit a spot with a lot of people. Yeah. And that idea of exploring your own religious, personal, actual, living, vibrant, lively connection with deity or divinity in whatever form it was quite exciting.
Yes,
and,
it certainly had a spot with Alex Saunders, didn't it?
Oh, I mean, he was one of many, indeed. But Saunders, yes, he did. I mean, he was really caught up in the whole thing, and he like others kind of pioneered that idea of starting religions. I don't think. I mean, I've always thought that Gerald Gardner was somewhat misunderstood. And I know that I don't think Gerald wanted to do anything other than see to it that this wonderful British religion that he thought he'd discovered or uncovered survived. I don't think he had any kind of aspirations to be a guru of it or to be, the great sage or anything else. He might have had a bit of an ego. I think he definitely did. He was promoting his Museum of Magic and Witchcraft, and he had to do so. But there was a whole new generation and breed of people like Alex Saunders in the 60s who wanted to carry the concept on, didn't they, David? That's what you're getting at, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is basically, yeah.
So, I mean, for those listeners who aren't familiar, within Wicca, modern Wicca, there's many strands, but two of the well-known strands are what we call Gardnerian Wicca and what we might call Alexandrian Wicca. And in short, Alex Saunders picked up some of the material that Gerald Gardner had been passing to his initiates and those who came along into his thing, and took some more of his own material, and he put the two together, and he created, if you like, another line, another way of looking at the craft. And he had his own interests and his own ideas about it. I'm sorry, I'm just my eyes catching the chat room where people are saying things like Gerald Gardner invented Wicca, and I think that's a kind of interesting idea. But Gardner certainly mixed up some of the things that and kept the mysteries in a way that was a bit transparent, saying things like these are practices that have been handed down from generation to generation for centuries wasn't completely true. But I think it's also a bit facile to suggest that Gerald Gardner invented the concepts of Wicca. He might have invented or at least developed some of the practices. And Sanders the same. You know, Sanders tapped into material from medieval grimoires, and Gardner himself was a Mason, and he was quite well knowledgeable about temple magic, Knights Templars and the like. So I think we're looking at a case of cobbling together a system from a concept that really is ancient and elderly, and old and deep and big. But the key point about Wicca, in both the cases of Alexandrian and Gardnerian, is that whatever was the origin of the system, whatever Gardner did and whatever Sanders did, you know, they basically created something that worked, that people do and did get in touch with their spiritual side and make that connection with divinity and with the divine and feel a sense of purpose from it, a sense of spiritual belonging from it that worked. And of course, the central tenets or the central methodology in both Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca is the idea of utilizing magic. And we can talk about what we mean by that as well, in order to create this this system whereby we can follow our religion and follow our own individual spirituality.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to play a quick break, and then we'll be back very shortly after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
And there you go. That was the amazing message from Harry Price himself. We're talking about Wicca tonight, and I'm joined by Ashley Mortimer and David Farrent. So you mentioned magic a little while ago. Do you want to elaborate on that?
All right. Well, okay. I mean, everyone's got an idea of what they think magic might be. I'd like to try and start from the basis of Aleister Crowley's definition, which is the art of causing changes in consciousness in conformity with one's will. And maybe expand that and simplify it, because I like things simple. One of the things I've learned about the craft over the years is that the more deep you get into the mysteries, the simpler they all really are. So I'd like to sort of just say that basically causing changes in the physical world through non-physical means is my definition of magic. And by that means that we're all doing magic almost on a daily basis, that the world changes around us because of the way we interact in our conscious and subconscious ways. The world of forces behind the world of form is quite a concept in the Wiccan view of the world and the Wiccan worldview, this idea that we've got non-physical forces that have a great effect upon the physical world around us. And that, to me, is the basis of magic. And being able to understand those non-physical forces behind the world of form and how they interact with it and how they interact with each other. And we get these mythological and mystery cycles like the concepts of divine feminine, divine masculine and fertility and universal things like that. Then that interaction with our own non-physical side, our own non-physical part is key to the art of magic, which is how a Wiccan connects with his divinity. And in fact, I would argue probably that that's how any person of any religion connects with their divinity, through an act of magic.
Okay. In the chat room, Andy Mercer has written, he's put, Ashley, do you disagree with Aidan A. Kelly's inventing witchcraft findings?
Oh, Aidan's a friend of mine, and funny enough, we were talking about what do you call it, seasonal rituals. Aidan named a number of the seasonal rituals in the Wiccan calendar, which is quite funny. So people talk about ancient names like the Festival of Mabon at autumn equinox, in the autumn, and in fact Kelly was the one who invented it. It's too long a story to get into deeply. Aidan Kelly's essentially took a book which, funny enough, it's got a relation to my own craft lineage and a guy called Charles Clark. But Kelly's book, Inventing Witchcraft, basically says that Gardner made it all up. And he peppered the ritual system with everything of his own. And that there is no part of the Wiccan rituals that are not easily traced as sources elsewhere. And to some extent, if you look at the rituals that Kelly was looking at, yes, that's true. However, the principles of the craft, and Aidan himself will tell you that what Gardner was really getting at and what he got his finger on the button of, whether he meant to or not, is something that does tap into these deeper cycles and these deeper notions and deeper ideas. So while in principle I don't disagree with, I think the problem with Kelly is that you can throw Aidan Kelly's work out with throw the baby out with the bathwater. What he did was he made an interesting study of a man beginning a religion. And in that respect, his book is really valuable and useful. It's also valuable and useful because of the methodology he used to interrogate the rituals that came to light through an accident of some letters that ended up in a publisher named Llewellyn's in America in the 1960s that turned out to be Gardner's early writings on the craft or early rituals. But I think the problem is that that if you view modern-day Wicca as nothing more than a collection of magical rituals, then you're missing the point of that connection with the mystery of the great religion, of the great mystery cycles and stories and so on. So I think you've got to be a bit on your guard for things like that. It's a good question. It's a good question. I can see that coming. But you have to really, as I say, I know Aidan and I know him quite well and I like the bloke. I know he's upset quite a lot of people in the craft by basically saying Gardner invented it all. And it's like most things that as a witch, you learn to study the world around you and see it from a different angle. I've been taught in my training in the craft to just look for the thing that's behind it. Look for what's going on in the background. Look for the extra bit of information. What else is there? And because very rarely what you're presented with is the whole truth. People don't always tell you the truth, and you don't always tell yourself the truth either. And what you see is it. So what you kind of, I was just going to say, what you sort of learn to develop is a kind of sixth sense, if you like, of wait a minute, there's something interesting here. I want to have a look at this. I want to see what it is. And I was, funny enough, we were talking about it earlier today. There's an ancient and medieval Scottish phrase where when they would throw the dirty water from the chamber pot onto the street out of the window, they would shout, "Gardy Lou, Gardy Lou." And I think that witches have this inbuilt sense of Gardy Lou over things that are not what they seem. So Kelly's idea that Gardner invented it all is something that raises the hackles of witches. And the reason it does is because he's getting at something that's got a semblance of truth, but there's something else behind it.
Yeah,
and
I mean, it seems to me like Gardner wasn't too happy with the religion as it was. And like Henry VIII, for example, with the Christianity thing, he took all the best bits out of the religion and added a few more of his own in, and he's come up with his own interpretation of Wicca. That's what it seems to me like.
Oh yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, everybody has their own interpretation, and everybody interacts with the mysteries in their own way, and in a different way. I mean, some people's way of doing ritual is different to others. People's styles are different. Gerald, I think the high, Alexander certainly like the high magic-y approach. Some people like a more ecstatic approach. Some people's rituals, even though they are the same written down rituals that Kelly was interrogating, people do them in different ways. I've been at Wiccan rituals where we've done things differently, and sometimes it's ecstatic in a sort of kind of wild and whipped up kind of frenzy of magic and sensuality, and it's almost like it's almost sexual. And then other times it's smooth and there's a different feeling, a sort of you can go from sexual to chocolate just like that. It's soft and smooth. And then other times it's very intense and very academic and very intellectual. And I think the point is that some words written on a piece of paper don't convey what it's like to take part in a mystery religion like Wicca, where you have to immerse and experience things in order to have any sense of understanding of them, and you do so in an idea that it's entirely subjective. So there you go.
Again, Andy
That's
Mercer.
your chocolate. There we are.
That's it. Andy Mercer, again in the chat room. I'm going to pose this question to both of you, actually. Do you believe Dorothy Clutterbuck was real? It sounds like something out of Harry Potter, doesn't it, really? Dorothy Clutterbuck.
Well, I can tell you a bit of that, but I think David should answer that question because I'm hogging the chat a bit at the minute. Does David, we were talking about this before we went on air, weren't we?
Yes, we were.
Okay, so do you believe...
Sorry, was she... Yeah, I've got no doubts in my mind that she was a real person, yes.
Okay. And what, for those like me that I've never heard of her, who is she? What did she do?
All right. Well, Dorothy Clutterbuck is said to be the person who initiated Gerald Gardner into the craft. Gerald got involved with a group of people working in an amateur dramatic society in near Christchurch in Hampshire in the New Forest. And he discovered that some of them were doing something a little bit extracurricular outside of that. And the suggestion was that this person called Dorothy Clutterbuck was the one who initiated Gerald Gardner into the mysteries. Now, the truth is that there is a lady called Dorothy Fordham, whose premarital name was Clutterbuck, and who lived in the area and who was indeed a patron of this amateur dramatics organisation and was friends with some of the other members. And she owned a house called Mill House, which is still standing in Highcliffe. We've been to visit it in the last few years. It's a nice place. And Gerald says that he was initiated, we presume, in the back room at Highcliffe, at Mill House at Highcliffe, although there's possible evidence elsewhere. And the house was owned by Dorothy Clutterbuck. There was a big debate for years that she didn't exist, and it was Doreen Valiente in the late 70s who did enough research to discover that Clutterbuck was a I can't remember, maiden name, and that this lady really did exist. But I think that subsequently scholars like Philip Heselton and perhaps Professor Hutton, Ronald Hutton, have more or less, I'm going to use the word proven, but I'm going to use that, I'm going to reserve my right to retract the word proven if necessary. People get upset about it. But they've more or less demonstrated then, shall we say, that the likelihood is that Dorothy Clutterbuck wasn't present at Gerald's initiation, and that Gerald, in fact, let people believe that Dorothy Clutterbuck was his initiator because it suited him to do so. She was dead and gone and passed, and there was nobody could say anything, and it really hid the identity of the people who really initiated him, who I believe, like Philip Heselton and other scholars on the subject, was in fact a lady called Edith Woodford Grimes. So there we go. So yes, Dorothy Clutterbuck existed, and she was certainly a patron of and a sympathiser with witchcraft and with Wicca, but I don't think that she was the one who initiated Gerald Gardner. David, have I said something to offend you, or is that fitting in with your sense of history there?
No, my sense of history is that, well, she obviously existed, and I believe at one stage she lived in Christchurch. She also owned the Mill House where Gerald Gardner claims he was taken and initiated by her. I don't know. I mean, records are so scant regarding actual initiation ceremonies. I couldn't really say if it was her in person. But to look at her character, I mean, she was a very wealthy woman. She owned probably more than just two properties, more than just Mill House and the one in Christchurch.
Yes, she did.
And well, to be honest, I was just guessing there, but I mean, it's obvious. I mean, the way she fitted in very well with the local communities, being, well, or she wanted people to believe she was a devout Christian. She attended church occasionally, and I think it really went from there, but there's no denying the fact. And my information was that Dorothy, okay, let's call her Fordham, actually got hold of, or copied, or both, a lot of Gerald Gardner's papers at the time, which mysteriously disappeared. And, well, of course, she's not around anymore to ask her. I think she died in 1951, if I can remember.
Are we talking about Dorothy Clutterbuck?
Yeah.
Yes, she did, yes.
So there's no real way of proving it.
No, I mean, there is no proof. Gerald's extant documents date back as early as, well, the late 30s. His Wiccan writings and rituals, the earliest we can date anything there is about 46, 47. There's a couple of books in existence. One's in Canada. One is in the hands of the organisation of which I'm a trustee, the Doreen Valiente Foundation. And it's what the scholars refer to as Text A, or what I would call what Doreen called Gerald's old book. And these are documents that contain Gerald's notes, probably about as early as it gets on anything containing something that looks like Wicca. There are earlier documents of Gerald's where he's interested in high magic and temple magic and Templars and Freemasonry and things like that, and medieval grimoires and the like. But essentially, the late 40s is when Gerald is starting to write these things down. And personally, I'm developing, and it'll get published one day, a newish theory, along with some other scholars, on the idea of why Gerald was initiated in 1938, 39, and didn't 39 that is, and didn't start writing things down in a book until the late 40s. And there's reasons for that, in my opinion, but. You know, those writings, what he was passed by who and what he was given by who, I don't know. He published a book in 1949 called High Magic's Aid, which is a novel, and he clearly put material into that was genuine witch rituals, but he also put other material that he'd read from medieval grimoires and elsewhere and mixed it up. And he really, before the witchcraft laws were repealed, he was trying to tell people about the craft in a fictional sense. So High Magic's Aid is a good place to look for Gerald's ideas about the craft and what he was given and what material he does. He says the witches gave him stuff and showed him what to do. But, I mean, initiates of the craft who are privy to the mysteries and the training that goes on, and you know, there are things that Gerald was doing and was showing people, and techniques and things that come from outside of that. Somebody showed him, somebody taught him what to do and how to do some of these things, and there's more knowledge about Gardner than just the published books, and in fact than the written rituals. And my opinion over the years of Gerald is that he's a bit misunderstood, and that he actually was a better magician than anybody gave him credit for, and he was a bloody good witch, and he knew what the hell he was doing when it came to working magic and working the art.
I'm inclined to agree with you there, yeah.
And I'm actually looking at some of the messages in the chat room. Ashley, you've inspired a new religion already. They're talking. Yeah, you have. They've taken your chocolatey sexuality religion.
Oh dear. My chocolatey sexuality. Well, there's very few people in the chat room who know anything about my chocolatey sexuality.
Well, they're making up their own rules as we speak.
Well, there's that as well. Yeah, I won't. I better not say any more. Okay.
Yeah, so you
I have spent a very late night in a hotel with Ashley Nibb once. So I mean, you know, that's. I can assure you that it didn't involve any chocolatey sexuality.
You say so. Okay, moving on from that.
Yes, indeed.
The holidays, the annual holidays. I mean, you mentioned like the Christmas and the Yuletide earlier on in the show. What other holidays do they Wiccans experience?
Well, you've got 8 festivals traditionally. That's later. Gerald's in the early Gardnerian craft of the 50s, they were probably only celebrating 4 times a year. But you've essentially got, as David said, the solstices and equinoxes, and then you've got the so-called cross-quarter days in between, which is May Day, Beltane, as the Celts would have called it, and Samhain, which is better known as Halloween. So you've got 8 solar festivals, or 8 festivals on the solar wheel, each of which have a significance to the journey of the sun through the sky and the interaction of the sky god with the Mother Earth goddess, and embodied and personified in craft terms in the sense of the relationship between the male god and the female goddess. as acted out by the high priest.
Do these the god and goddess that you've mentioned? Do they not have a name?
Yep.
Okay.
It's a mystery. It's a mystery. They have many names and there are many names for goddesses, and I mean, really, we're back to trying to decide what our view of divinity is. To give a goddess or a god a name, does that really constrain them by that name? I mean, we all know that there are many Greek and Roman goddesses that are probably essentially the same facet or the same aspect, shall we say? That's a good word. The same aspect of a goddess that are worshipped in different ways by different people in different times. So, the names, names have power. There's no question of that. But in the craft, the different branches of the craft will probably have different names for the for the way that they would talk about and address these personifications of goddess and god. And it's true to say that one of the secrets of Gardnerian craft are indeed the secret and hidden names of the gods and goddesses. However, I would say that much more important than that it's not really a religion of secrets; it's a religion of mysteries, and it's the involvement in and participation in, with training, knowledge and understanding of those mysteries. That's where the real secrets are, not in who can keep quiet about what the name of a god or a goddess is.
Yeah. Okay. Again, Andy Mercer in the chat room, he said, would you say that what Gerald learned was the local faith, not something that he already widespread? If that makes sense.
Are you? Am I jumping in again, or does David have it?
David?
I don't honestly know, Paul. I wouldn't like to guess at that.
Okay.
I mean, Ashley's quite right. There are common names for the mother goddess. Things like, comes to mind, Selene, Artemis, Arcadia. They're all very general names. Each group, each coven, if you like, claims to address the mother goddess by a certain name, and that sort of ensures personal contact. If you call her by that name during a certain ritual, she's more likely to appear, if you like. I don't mean so much materialise, but appear in the presence of a particular ceremony.
Okay. What about you, Ashley? Do you agree?
David's quite right. There are these different names. I mean, he listed a few. Selene is a Greek moon goddess. You've got Artemis, Astarte, Diana, Melusine, Aphrodite. I mean, these are different names of the goddess in these aspects. I suppose one thing I can say to you is that most of the different Wiccan covens take the view that the goddess has a sense of triplicity. There are three major aspects to the goddesses, and these are the maiden, the mother, and the crone, as we would call them. So you're talking about a sort of a virginal, bright, young goddess who matures into a fruit-bearing, fertility, motherly goddess, and eventually a barren crone. And this is the journey of the goddess, if you like, through her life cycle and her interrelationships with the god and so on. But the names then reflect, the names of these different goddesses reflect these different aspects and the bits in between those aspects, the promise of what's of the other part of what's to come, because always everything moves in a pattern. So a goddess who is filled with fertility is heading towards barrenness, and then the barren goddess is heading towards renewal and rejuvenation and rebirth again as the bright virgin again the next spring. So just as the sun returns every year, so the goddess is going through her cycle too. Yeah. And these goddess names from different places, if you start viewing them through the lens of triple aspected goddesses, you can start to see and pick out similarities and which ones they might relate to.
Yes, Ashley, but that's only in the human sense, isn't it? I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
It's only human beings that see those three differences.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's definitely an artificially human construct, or certainly personification, quite right. But the question is are we talking? I mean, I suppose the big question of any religion is are we talking about what's reflecting what? Is this a human view of it, or is this a human view of the forces behind the form, or is this the form reflecting into force and then into artificial human personification? And I don't know. It's like the bloody Jungle Book, isn't it? You know, it's anthropomorphic, isn't it? The idea that a god and a goddess are male and female, when in fact what we're talking about is masculine and feminine.
Yes, but basically that is based on the principle of the laws of existence, surely on the laws of nature. I mean,
absolutely.
People realise that the feminine aspect was really the aspect that gave birth to all things, including nature, including human beings. But she also needed a male aspect to, if you like, seal it.
Yeah, I mean, there are other religious writings. There are documents like the so-called Gnostic Gospels, Pistis Sophia, and things. These ideas of a creatrix goddess who's without the masculine force is not able to actually properly create and becomes imprisoned in her own delusion of her creation. And there's quite complex ideas about these sorts of things. But yes, you're right. It's this idea of the feminine divine principle being fruitful and life-bearing, but requiring that input of the active male force in order for that to happen.
Well, we've got a couple of questions in the chat room. Ashley Nib said, would the names used in rituals depend on the ritual and possible astrological positions as well?
Yes.
There you go. That's yours answered, Ashley.
Well, I mean, it depends. Yeah, I mean, they can do. It depends on which coven you would go to and where you would go. So yes, but the astrological, yeah, possibly. These, you know, I mean, we're talking about names, and I think it's important to remember that the name isn't the thing. The name represents the thing, and the names are useful in all languages. Useful, provided we remember it's only language. It's not the reality that it's trying to represent.
Yeah. And Richard Clements also asks, was the whole idea of covens of witches an idea that Gardner introduced?
Do you want to take that one, David?
No, I don't believe Gardner introduced it. You know, I was having this, I was being interviewed by John Kaneko James, who himself is a folklorist. And this whole question came up about the origins of Wicca. And he asked me what I thought about it. And I said, well, the common conception of that is that Gardner sort of invented it, or he started it. And I said, quite frankly to him, that's not true. It went back decades, centuries before that, when there was an understanding of the true meaning of nature and the understanding of people. And I don't believe for 1 minute that Gardner invented it. My answer, I explained that to John Kaneko James. And he said, would it be right? He said, what you're saying is what you're saying. When Gardner came along, it was already existent, but he codified it. And I think that's a very good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
He did, he codified it, and he went through ancient writings, he went through the whole lot, and he put all these rituals together in the way he considered it, as he understood them. And so I would say in a sentence, no, Gardner did not invent modern Wicca, witchcraft. In John Kaneko James's words, he codified it. He sorted it all out because it had been broken up, fragmented, sections of it lost. It was all over the place. He put it in a language that people could understand. Yes, he was trying to keep the old religion of Wicca going. I think that was one of his main objectives, which is why I think he initiated Doreen Valiente, didn't he? And she became the High Priestess.
Of his newly formed Bricketwood Coven in the 50s, yes, correct.
Yes. Yeah. And after that, as always happens, there was a bit of inter-rivalry there. I think she saw Gardner as breaking some of the laws of secrecy, publishing his book, for example, Witchcraft Day in 1954. And there was a split, and she actually left, I believe it was around 1957, 1958. And that's, of course, when she went to form her own coven and also got mixed up with the coven in Highgate.
Mm-hmm.
We used to meet in Highgate Woods. Well, actually, it was Queen's Woods. But it's all one big wood. I mean, where I live, I've got a self-contained attic flat. It's quite high up. If I look out my window, I can see Highgate Woods. It's completely different to Queen's Woods. It's owned by the Haringey Council, I think. I don't know who Queen's Woods is owned by now, but it was all once a part of the Forest of London. And now all that divides it is a road running through the middle. And it is in Queenswood where the Regency Coven used to hold their meetings and meet. And Doreen Valiente apparently attended some of these meetings. And tragically, in 1966, Robert Coltrane, well, he supposedly committed suicide. I better not say any more about that because I'm not sure at this stage, but he died under suspicious circumstances.
He certainly, certainly Doreen received a letter that disturbed her greatly a few days afterwards because I think she'd been in hospital and she received a letter that indicated that he was in some kind of, that something was going to happen. And it looks like it was either a tragic accident or a deliberate suicide, and that was midsummer 1966, as you say.
Yeah, that's right. So who really knows? I mean, it's at this stage it's just speculation, isn't it, as to why he died?
It is. I mean, Doreen Valiente is very synonymous with Gerald Gardner. She did work with Gerald. She was initiated by Gerald, but the two fell out, mostly over Gerald's publicity seeking and that's like the anarchic way of running covens. That would be about 57. They did make friends again, but they never worked magically. And Doreen ploughed her own furrow. She became a really important figure in popularising and moving the craft onwards. And moving on people's understanding of paganism and people's ability to connect with their own pagan leanings. She spent the rest of her life doing so, and she worked with a number of other people in witchcraft, including Robert Cochrane, who was a young man who she took a great shine to, and she speaks and writes very fondly of her rituals. I think she felt that some of the outdoor nature of where they did their rituals was something that she really connected with.
Which was obviously Queen's Wood in Highgate.
And the South Downs as well, but yes, yeah, that's right.
Cool. So if there is anyone out there that is interested in the whole Wicca faith and stuff like that, where would be the best place to start?
Looking at me, well, read widely and don't believe anything you read.
Yeah.
Trust no one, really read widely. There are organisations like the Pagan Federation, which have been around for 40 years. Doreen Valiente was a one of the people who founded the forerunner of that organisation. You can find a pagan federation just about anywhere, easily found on Facebook and the internet, but there's local branches in just about every country in the world.
Yeah.
And I, in the world of paganism, there's a common phenomenon called mooting, where people get together in sometimes slightly more formal, sometimes very informal social circumstances where they can encounter each other. And the best way to find out about witchcraft and paganism is to meet and talk to other witches and pagans. And the moots that are run by, I think in a lot of territories, a lot of places, the Pagan Federation knows who's running the moots, even if they're not running them themselves. And moots can often be once a month events that take place in a pub or a public place anywhere, a coffee house or something like that. And it's a chance to interact with other pagans. So the Pagan Federation would be my recommendation for where to start. But there are other organisations like the Children of Artemis, and in fact we'll help as well from the Centre for Pagan Studies and the Doreen Valiente Foundation to put people in touch with where they can find other information out. And there are good books published. There are absolutely literally millions of books on the subject. But if you're looking for authors like Doreen Valiente and possibly Janet and Stuart Farrar, and there are one or two. There are good reading lists. If you use the internet, then you'll be able to get a good reading list from somebody of which books are the best way to do it. But study everything and believe nothing. That would be my advice. And get in touch with practicing pagans. If you've got an interest, then there are social events, there are conferences, there are places to go where the pagan community are quite welcoming. Pagan Pride is a newer phenomenon. We have a very big pagan pride here in Nottingham. It was one of the first ones in this country. And these are events where it's possible to interact with and get a better idea and flavour for what the pagan community is like, because it's a very broad and very vibrant and quite an exciting community.
And before we go, David, what advice would you give anyone that wanted to become a pagan or Wicca?
Well, I'm very confused about that, to be honest with you, Paul, because it might not be time now, but I'd like to ask Ashley what he thinks about the mixing, or if you like, the coming together of the pagan community and the actually old Wiccan one, which was completely...
Well, we've got time, so if you want to go for it, Ashley, there you go.
Right. I think it's quite an interesting interface. I think one of the things we've got to realise is that some people like their anonymity and, in fact, their secrecy. And there's certain sectors of what I'm going to call the pagan community, even though they might not consider themselves part of the community. But there are some sectors which have remained on the fringes of society and have enjoyed that place and that slightly off-centre aspect to where they sit in terms of the community. And I think that organisations like the Pagan Federation, trying to be an umbrella organisation, really need to remember that these people are there to be catered to as well, and that secrecy and anonymity, which in some of the more traditional craft, shall we say, lines, lineages and traditions, is much more important to them, that they want to, remain underground, remain where they are, and they're perfectly entitled to do that and should be so. And in fact, the Regardnerian, I'm an unusual case because, I'm out here talking to anybody and everybody as much as I can about witchcraft and about paganism, because I like the idea of following on Doreen Valiente's work and raising awareness. But I'm very aware that there are a large sector of our community that would much rather just quietly get their heads down and get on with things. And I know that I think what David's getting at is that within those less Wiccan and more traditional craft traditions, there's an even greater desire to remain anonymous, if not secret. And it makes an interesting interface when they encounter the more, shall we say, the more obvious aspect of the pagan community, which are quite often people who are more flamboyant characters who perhaps have a little less experience and knowledge of hardcore magical traditions than perhaps they'd like to let the world know. Did I say that politely and politically correctly?
Yeah, that worked for me. Went right
Doreen
on my
used to
head.
say, Doreen Valiente used to say that there are three kinds of witches. She said there's those who were absolutely born to the craft and who were probably reincarnated from it before. There are those who work really hard at it and who really, really want to be good at being witches and good at magic. And my friend who's passed and deceased, who's the founder of the foundation, John Bell Payne, John said when Doreen told him that, he was thinking, like we all were, which one am I? And then he said, hang on a minute, Doreen, you mentioned 3 witches, 3 kinds of witches. He said, you've only told me about 2 of them. What's the other kind? Oh, yes, she said, they're the ones with all the best jewellery. They're the ones with all the best robes and all the best equipment, and they're the flamboyant ones. So I think the pagan community's found quite a bit of that over the years. So I think, is that what you're getting at, David? That there's a kind of there's an interface where the twain might meet or may not meet.
No, what I was basically asking is, what do you know? Because I don't. What do pagans accept? That's the pagan community. Accept the existence of a feminine principle. In other words, a mother goddess. I don't know. I've seen no evidence of that.
You're talking about people's individual personal belief in deity and divinity as a...
Well, I'm talking generally. I mean, as a part of their movement. I don't
know. I don't know. I think that's interesting you say you've seen no evidence of that. I think I've seen plenty of evidence of people saying that. Although, I mean, a wider pagan view isn't necessarily a feminine divine principle. It's certainly a spirit of nature, if you like, a divine principle of nature, rather, which doesn't necessarily have to be constrained by terms like masculine and feminine. But I think it's true to say that, generally speaking, most people who you'll meet at pagan conferences and pagan events would acknowledge a mother goddess. Yeah, wouldn't you say?
I haven't found that myself. No, I haven't.
What do you find is the predominant belief? Fundamental belief?
Well, exactly what you just said. They tend to believe more in the nature side of it.
Right. Okay, rather than the personification as a divine feminine.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, I'd go along with that. There's certainly now you made me think about that, then I'd say that there's a mixture of people on both those. Quite. I mean, certainly Wicca takes the view that personifying a polarity of masculine and femininity as forces of nature and their interaction and their union and the fruit of that union and the recycling of it, that's how Wicca views it. But that isn't necessarily the view of the rest of the wider pagan community. And you're quite right. The Pagan Federation was founded on 3 principles, which is, a reverence for nature is one of those principles, not reverence for a mother goddess.
Yeah, that's what I thought, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've gone over our slot, so unfortunately we're going to have to say good night and thank you to everybody that's been in the chat room. I want to thank David Farrent for coming on tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully we'll get to have you back again with us soon. And Ashley, thank you. It's again been a pleasure, and hopefully you can join us again.
I'd like that very much, and I very much enjoyed being on the show. Meeting you and meeting David was excellent. I really enjoyed talking to you, David. It was really good.
Yeah, I think we could have done like another 3-hour show, but
we scratched the surface with everything, didn't we?
Absolutely,
really?
Yeah, but there's so much more involved, and I mean, I've done research, and we pulled up loads of information, and we've hardly gone through any of it really. So we're definitely going to have to revisit this subject. I think definitely got to be done. Yeah.
What I do on a daily basis, so there we go.
Okay,
I'm happy to do that in company of other people anytime.
This time, same time next week, then, yeah. Well, sort of next week's show is going to be about ancient monuments, and I've got Norman Fay joining us, and I'm looking forward to that show. That'd be quite a good one. So, yep, all that remains to be said is thank you, everybody, and good night. See you all next week.
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
No worries.